The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Sarah Martinez wiped down another rifle barrel with practiced precision. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding every motion as she had done thousands of times before. The armory was her domain, a place where precision mattered and every weapon had to be maintained to perfection. She had been working here for 3 years now, ever since completing her military service as a logistics specialist. Sarah never imagined she would find herself in this position when she first enlisted. Growing up in rural Montana, she had learned to shoot out of necessity. Her father owned a ranch, and keeping predators away from livestock was just part of daily life. She could hit a coyote at 200 meters with iron sights before she turned 16. But military life had taken her in a different direction, away from the shooting range and into supply management. The transition to civilian contractor work at the Special Forces training facility seemed natural enough. The pay was decent, the work steady, and she understood weapons better than most people understood their morning coffee routine. Every day, elite soldiers would bring their rifles to her for cleaning, maintenance, and minor repairs. She treated each weapon with the respect it deserved, knowing that lives depended on their reliability. On this particular morning, the armory buzzed with more activity than usual. A new batch of Special Forces candidates had arrived for advanced sniper training, and their equipment needed thorough inspection before the exercises began. Sarah methodically checked each rifle's scope mounting, trigger mechanism, and barrel condition. She made notes about minor adjustments needed and set aside weapons requiring more extensive work. The candidates themselves were an impressive group. These weren't fresh recruits but experienced soldiers who had already proven themselves in various combat situations. They moved with quiet confidence, speaking in low tones about upcoming exercises and comparing notes about different rifle configurations. Sarah listened while she worked, learning about their experiences and the challenges they had faced in the field. One particular conversation caught her attention. 2 candidates were discussing a recent mission where they had to make an extremely long-range shot to eliminate a high-value target. The distance had been over 3,000 meters, pushing the absolute limits of their equipment and skills. They talked about wind calculations, atmospheric conditions, and the split-second timing required for such precision work. Sarah found herself thinking about her own shooting experience. Ranch work had required quick, accurate shots at relatively short distances, but she had never attempted anything approaching sniper-level precision. The mathematical calculations these soldiers discussed seemed almost like a different language, filled with technical terms about ballistic coefficients and environmental factors she had never considered. As she continued working, one of the instructors entered the armory. Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams was a legend among military snipers, with confirmed kills at distances most people could barely see. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and even seasoned Special Forces operators treated him with noticeable respect. Sarah had heard stories about his record-breaking shots, including one that allegedly saved an entire platoon during a mission in Afghanistan. Williams approached Sarah's workstation and examined the rifle she was cleaning. He picked it up, checked the action, and peered through the scope with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years perfecting his craft. Sarah watched nervously, hoping she hadn't missed anything during her inspection. The weapon was a high-end precision rifle worth more than her annual salary. "Good work," Williams said simply, setting the rifle down carefully. "You know these weapons better than some of the soldiers who use them." Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment. Coming from someone of Williams' caliber, those words meant something significant. Their conversation might have ended there, but Sarah found herself asking about the long-range shooting techniques the candidates had been discussing. Williams seemed surprised by her interest but began explaining the basics of extreme-distance marksmanship. He talked about the importance of understanding environmental conditions, the need for precise calculations, and the mental discipline required to make shots measured in kilometers rather than meters. "Have you ever tried long-range shooting?" Williams asked. Sarah mentioned her ranch background and the hunting she had done growing up. Williams nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that rural shooting experience often produced people with natural marksmanship instincts. "Different world, though," he continued. What we do out here goes way beyond hunting or ranch work. We're talking about precision at distances where you can barely see your target, where a slight change in wind speed can throw your shot off by meters. Most people don't have the patience or the mental focus required for this kind of work. Sarah found herself defending her abilities, perhaps more strongly than she had intended. She talked about the long shots she had made hunting elk in the mountains, situations where she had to account for wind and distance. Williams listened with growing interest, recognizing something in her tone that suggested genuine confidence rather than empty boasting. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several sniper candidates who needed their equipment checked. Williams stepped aside to brief them about the day's training schedule, while Sarah returned to her work. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred, though she wasn't sure exactly what. Later that afternoon, Williams returned to the armory alone. He found Sarah organizing ammunition supplies, checking lot numbers and ensuring proper storage conditions. He watched her work for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier," he said. "You seem to understand weapons and shooting better than most people I meet. But understanding and doing are two different things, especially when we're talking about the kind of precision work my students do." Sarah looked up from her inventory sheets, sensing that Williams was leading somewhere specific with this conversation. There was something in his tone that suggested more than casual interest in her shooting background. "What kind of distances are we talking about?" she asked. Williams smiled, recognizing the competitive edge in her voice. It was the same tone he had heard from countless soldiers who refused to back down from a challenge. "The current training record for this facility is 4,300 meters," Williams said slowly, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "It was set by one of my best students about 6 months ago. The shot took 3 attempts and required perfect conditions." Sarah tried to imagine a distance that vast. 4,300 meters was nearly 3 miles, a span that would require her to use binoculars just to see the target clearly. The mathematics alone seemed overwhelming, requiring calculations for bullet drop, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, and probably a dozen other factors she had never considered. "That's an incredible distance," she said finally. Williams nodded, but there was something else in his expression, a calculating look that made Sarah wonder what he was really thinking. "It is," he agreed. "Most people would consider it impossible. Even among trained snipers, very few have the skills necessary to consistently hit targets at that range. It requires years of training, extensive understanding of ballistics, and mental discipline that most people simply don't possess." Sarah felt a familiar stirring, the same competitive instinct that had driven her to excel in every challenge throughout her military service. She had never been the type to back down from difficult tasks, and something about Williams' tone suggested he was issuing a challenge rather than simply sharing information. "Hypothetically," she said carefully, "if someone wanted to attempt a shot like that, what would it involve?" Williams' smile widened slightly. This was exactly the response he had been hoping for. "Hypothetically," he replied, "it would require access to the right equipment, proper training on advanced ballistic calculations, and range time under controlled conditions. It would also require someone crazy enough to think they could succeed where most trained professionals would expect to fail." The challenge was now clearly on the table, though either of them had stated it directly. Sarah found her heart racing as she considered the implications. She was being offered an opportunity to attempt something extraordinary, something that would test every aspect of her shooting skills and mental toughness. "When would this hypothetical attempt take place?" she asked. Williams checked his watch and considered the training schedule. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Early, before the regular training begins. That would give us access to the long-range course without interference from other activities." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and terror at how quickly this was moving. "I'll think about it," she said, though they both knew she had already made her decision. Williams nodded and headed toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time, "this isn't just about proving a point. If you're going to attempt this shot, You need to understand that failure is not only possible but likely. Even with perfect conditions and ideal equipment, shots at this distance require skills that take years to develop. I understand, Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she did. Williams studied her face for a moment, then nodded and left the armory. As evening approached and Sarah finished her daily tasks, she found herself thinking about the challenge ahead. Part of her wondered if she was being foolish, attempting something so far beyond her experience. But another part, the competitive spirit that had carried her through military service and every other challenge in her life, was already calculating possibilities and planning for success. She spent the evening reading everything she could find about long-range shooting techniques, studying ballistic charts and environmental factors that could affect bullet trajectory. The mathematics were complex, but not incomprehensible. With proper guidance and the right equipment, perhaps the impossible might become merely improbable. Tomorrow would determine whether Sarah Martinez, rifle cleaner and former logistics specialist, had what it took to join the ranks of elite marksmen. The challenge of 4,300 meters awaited. Dawn broke cold and clear across the training facility as Sarah arrived at the long-range course. She had barely slept, spending most of the night studying ballistic tables and trying to understand the complex calculations that would be required for the shot ahead. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried her gear bag across the dewy grass, though whether from cold or nerves she couldn't tell. Williams was already there, setting up equipment beside a massive precision rifle mounted on a specialized rest. The weapon looked more like a piece of scientific equipment than a traditional firearm, with an enormous scope and various measuring devices attached to its frame. Beside it sat a sophisticated weather station, displaying wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure with digital precision. "Sleep well?" Williams asked with a knowing smile. Sarah shook her head ruefully, admitting that excitement and anxiety had kept her awake most of the night. Williams nodded understandingly. He had seen the same reaction in countless soldiers before their first attempt at extreme-range shooting. "That's normal," he said. "The mental preparation is often harder than the physical execution. Today you're going to learn why we call this precision shooting rather than marksmanship. Everything you thought you knew about shooting is going to be challenged." Williams began by explaining the equipment they would be using. The rifle was a custom-built platform designed specifically for extreme-range work, chambered in a high-velocity cartridge that could maintain accuracy over vast distances. The scope was a work of art, with magnification capabilities that would allow Sarah to see details on the target that would be invisible to the naked eye. But the most important equipment, Williams explained, wasn't mechanical at all. He pulled out a tablet computer loaded with ballistic software that could calculate bullet trajectory based on dozens of environmental variables. The program required input about ammunition specifications, atmospheric conditions, target distance, and shooting angle to generate firing solutions accurate to fractions of degrees. "This is where most people fail," Williams said, demonstrating how to use the software. "They think shooting is all about steady hands and good eyesight. At extreme range, it's about mathematics and environmental science. Your bullet is going to be in the air for over 6 seconds. During that time, gravity will pull it down dozens of feet, wind will push it sideways, and atmospheric conditions will affect its velocity." Sarah watched as Williams input data into the program. The numbers were staggering. At 4,300 meters, the bullet would drop over 400 feet from its initial trajectory. Even a slight crosswind of 5 miles per hour would push the projectile several meters off target. The calculations required to compensate for these factors seemed overwhelming. "Let me show you what we're dealing with," Williams said, handing Sarah a pair of high-powered binoculars and pointing toward the distant target. Sarah adjusted the focus and finally located the target area, a small steel plate that appeared barely larger than a postage stamp at this distance. The idea of hitting something so small, so far away, suddenly, seemed completely impossible. "That's 4¼ kilometers," Williams continued. "At this distance, your target appears smaller than it actually is because of atmospheric distortion. Heat waves rising from the ground create mirage effects that can make the target appear to dance around. Learning to read and compensate for these visual tricks is crucial. They spent the next hour going through basic long-range shooting principles. Williams explained how to read wind conditions not just at the firing position, but at multiple points along the bullet's path. He showed Sarah how to use vegetation, flags, and mirage patterns to estimate wind speed and direction at different distances. Each segment of the bullet's flight path had to be analyzed separately. The wind you feel here might be completely different from conditions halfway to the target, Williams explained. You need to read the entire environment like a weather map, understanding how air currents change over the terrain. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the complexity, but fascinated by the scientific precision required. Williams then demonstrated the shooting position and rifle control techniques necessary for extreme accuracy. Every aspect of body position mattered, from the angle of her supporting hand to the pressure applied by her cheek against the rifle stock. He showed her breathing techniques that would minimize movement during the critical moment of trigger release. At this distance, the slightest movement gets magnified exponentially, Williams said. A tremor in your hand that wouldn't affect a 100-meter shot can cause you to miss the entire target area at 4,300 meters. Everything has to be perfectly controlled. Sarah practiced the shooting position repeatedly, with Williams making constant adjustments to her form. She was surprised by how different this felt from the casual shooting she had done on the ranch. Every muscle had to be relaxed yet controlled, every breath calculated and precise. The level of concentration required was unlike anything she had experienced. After an hour of position practice, Williams decided it was time for Sarah to attempt her first long-range shots, though not at the ultimate target distance. He set up targets at 800 meters, a distance that Sarah considered extremely challenging but not impossible based on her previous experience. We need to establish your baseline accuracy and get you comfortable with the equipment, Williams explained. If you can't consistently hit targets at 800 meters, there's no point in attempting 4,300. Sarah nodded, understanding the logic but feeling pressure to perform well at this preliminary distance. The first shot was a complete miss. Sarah's bullet struck dirt several meters below the target, despite careful calculations and what felt like perfect execution. Williams examined the impact through his spotting scope and made notes about the miss. Bullet drop was miscalculated, he said calmly. At this distance, even small errors in data input get magnified significantly. Let's adjust the scope and try again. They made corrections to the scope settings and recalculated the ballistic solution. Sarah's second shot hit the target area but missed the center ring by a significant margin. Williams seemed pleased with the improvement, explaining that this was typical for someone's first experience with precision long-range shooting. They continued making minor adjustments, with Williams explaining the reasoning behind each change. By her fifth shot, Sarah was consistently hitting the target center. Williams nodded approvingly, recognizing that she had natural shooting ability that could be developed with proper training. But he also wanted her to understand the magnitude of difference between 800 meters and their ultimate goal. What you just accomplished is impressive, Williams said. Most people would be satisfied with that level of accuracy. But remember, we're talking about increasing the distance by more than 5 times. Every challenge you faced at 800 meters gets exponentially more difficult. They moved to targets at 1,200 meters, then 1,800 meters, gradually increasing the distance and complexity of the shots. At each range, Sarah had to relearn her approach, recalculating environmental factors and adjusting her technique. The mathematical precision required increased dramatically with each step. At 1,800 meters, Sarah's bullets were taking nearly 3 seconds to reach the target. Wind conditions that seemed insignificant at shorter ranges now caused dramatic misses. She began to understand why Williams had emphasized the importance of environmental reading skills. This is where most people hit their limit, Williams explained after Sarah struggled with several consecutive misses at the longer distance. The mental demands start overwhelming the physical skills. Your brain has to process more information than it's accustomed to handling. But Sarah was determined to push through the difficulties. She asked Williams to explain the wind reading techniques again, studying the environmental indicators with renewed intensity. Gradually, her accuracy improved as she learned to interpret the subtle signs that revealed atmospheric conditions. By mid-morning, Sarah was hitting targets consistently at 2,000 meters. Williams was impressed by her rapid progress, though he cautioned that they were still only approaching half the distance of their ultimate goal. The mathematical complexity would continue increasing, and environmental factors would become even more critical. "Are you ready to see what 4,300 meters actually looks like?" Williams asked. Sarah nodded, though she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about confronting the full challenge. Williams led her to the firing position that faced the maximum distance target. Looking through the scope at the distant target, Sarah felt her confidence waver. The steel plate appeared impossibly small, shimmering in the heat waves that rose from the intervening terrain. Between their position and the target lay rolling hills, scattered vegetation, and varying wind conditions that would affect every meter of the bullet's flight path. Williams began explaining the environmental analysis required for the shot. He pointed out wind indicators at different distances, showing how air currents change direction and speed across the varied terrain. He demonstrated how to read mirage patterns that revealed temperature gradients affecting bullet velocity. "The bullet will be in flight for approximately 6.3 seconds, Williams explained. "During that time, it will experience different wind conditions, varying air density, and gravitational effects that must all be calculated precisely. This is why we use computer modeling instead of relying on instinct." They spent time inputting data into the ballistic computer, with Williams explaining each variable and its potential impact on accuracy. Ammunition temperature affected muzzle velocity. Barometric pressure influenced air density. Even the rotation of the Earth had a measurable effect on bullet trajectory over such extreme distances. Sarah found herself fascinated by the scientific complexity of the challenge. This wasn't just shooting, it was applied physics and environmental science rolled into a single precise calculation. The romantic image of the intuitive marksman was replaced by the reality of mathematical precision and technological assistance. "Are you having second thoughts?" Williams asked, recognizing the somewhat overwhelmed expression on Sarah's face. She shook her head firmly, though she had to admit that the challenge was far more complex than she had originally imagined. "It's different from what I expected," Sarah said honestly. "But that makes it more interesting, not less. I want to understand how this works." Williams smiled, recognizing the same intellectual curiosity that had driven his own development as a precision marksman. They continued analyzing the shot requirements, with Williams sharing techniques developed through years of experience. He explained how to time the shot to coincide with optimal wind conditions, how to account for the target's movement caused by thermal expansion, and how to maintain mental focus during the extended preparation required. As the afternoon approached, Williams suggested they return the following day for the actual attempt. Sarah had absorbed an enormous amount of technical information, and he wanted her to have time to process everything before attempting the ultimate challenge. "Tomorrow we'll start early, when atmospheric conditions are most stable," Williams explained. "You'll get 3 attempts at the shot, which is what the current record holder required. If you succeed, you'll join a very exclusive group of people who have accomplished something most professional snipers consider impossible." Sarah spent the evening reviewing her notes and studying the ballistic software Williams had introduced her to. She practiced the calculations repeatedly, building confidence in her ability to process the mathematical requirements quickly and accurately. The challenge ahead seemed enormous, but no longer impossible. Tomorrow would determine whether precision shooting was a skill she could master, or a limitation she would have to accept. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., but Sarah was already awake, staring at the ceiling and running through ballistic calculations in her mind. She had spent the previous evening studying wind patterns, atmospheric pressure tables, and trajectory charts until the numbers began to blur together. Now, in the pre-dawn darkness, everything seemed crystal clear and impossibly complex at the same time. Williams met her at the range as the first hints of sunlight appeared on the horizon. The air was still and cold, perfect conditions for extreme-range shooting. He had arrived even earlier, setting up the sophisticated weather monitoring equipment, and checking every component of the precision rifle system they would be using. "How are you feeling?" Williams asked, though Sarah's tense posture and slightly pale complexion already provided the answer. She was nervous, excited, and struggling to contain the adrenaline that had been building since she woke up. Williams recognized the symptoms from his own experience and from training countless other shooters. "Like I'm about to attempt something completely crazy," Sarah admitted. Williams chuckled and nodded approvingly. He had learned to be suspicious of students who weren't nervous before attempting extreme-range shots. Overconfidence usually led to sloppy preparation and inevitable failure. "Nervous is good," Williams said. "It means you understand the magnitude of what we're attempting. Channel that energy into focus and attention to detail. Today, every small factor matters more than you can imagine." They began by checking atmospheric conditions with scientific precision. Williams showed Sarah how to read the weather station data, explaining how each variable would affect their calculations. Temperature was 42 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 65%, barometric pressure steady at 30.12 inches of mercury. Wind speed at their position was barely detectable at 2 miles per hour from the northwest. "These are exceptional conditions," Williams explained as they recorded the data. "Low wind, stable pressure, clear atmosphere. If we're going to succeed, this is the kind of environment we need." Sarah felt both encouraged and pressured by this information. Perfect conditions meant fewer excuses if she failed. Williams guided her through the ballistic calculations with meticulous care. They input ammunition data, environmental factors, and target specifications into the computer software. The program calculated bullet drop at 412 feet, wind drift at 3.2 feet to the southeast, and a flight time of 6.31 seconds. The numbers seemed almost abstract until Williams translated them into scope adjustments. "Your point of aim will be approximately 40 feet above the actual target," Williams explained, showing Sarah the dramatic scope elevation required. "At this distance, you're essentially shooting at empty sky and trusting mathematics to bring the bullet down onto the target." The concept was difficult to accept intellectually, even with complete faith in the calculations. Sarah spent 30 minutes practicing her shooting position, while Williams made final adjustments to the rifle system. Every aspect of her form was scrutinized and corrected. The pressure of her cheek against the stock, the angle of her supporting arm, the tension in her shooting hand, all were adjusted to optimize stability and repeatability. "Remember, at this distance, microscopic inconsistencies become massive errors," Williams said as he checked her position one final time. "Everything has to be exactly the same for each shot. Your body becomes part of the mechanical system." Sarah concentrated on memorizing how each position felt, building muscle memory for the critical moments ahead. At exactly 6 a.m., Williams declared conditions optimal for the first attempt. They had been monitoring wind patterns across the range, watching for the brief periods when air currents stabilized along the entire bullet path. These windows lasted only minutes before atmospheric conditions shifted again. Sarah settled into her shooting position behind the massive precision rifle. Through the high-magnification scope, the distant target appeared as a small steel rectangle shimmering in the morning air. At maximum magnification, she could see the target clearly, but it still seemed impossibly small considering the distance involved. Williams positioned himself beside her with a powerful spotting scope, ready to observe bullet impact and provide immediate feedback. He had a secondary ballistic computer running parallel calculations to verify their shooting solution. Everything that could be controlled had been optimized for success. "Take your time with the first shot," Williams advised. "Get comfortable with the rifle, establish your breathing rhythm, and execute when everything feels right. Don't rush the trigger press. At this distance, hasty shots always fail." Sarah began her breathing sequence, settling into the controlled respiration pattern Williams had taught her. She focused on the target through the scope, making micro-adjustments to her aim point based on the calculated ballistic solution. The crosshairs settled on a point roughly 40 feet above the visible target, trusting mathematics over visual intuition. The moment of trigger release felt perfect. The rifle recoiled smoothly, and Sarah maintained her position to observe the shot's outcome. Williams tracked the bullet's trajectory through his spotting scope, following its path toward the distant target. After what seemed like an eternity, he announced the result. Miss, low end right. About 15 feet from the target center. Sarah felt disappointed but not devastated. Williams had warned her that first attempts rarely succeeded, even under ideal conditions. The miss provided valuable data for adjusting subsequent shots. Williams analyzed the impact location and compared it to their predicted trajectory. The bullet had landed closer to the calculated impact point than many experienced snipers achieved on their first extreme-range attempts. He made notes about the deviation and began recalculating their ballistic solution. The miss tells us several things, Williams explained as he worked through the new calculations. Wind conditions were slightly different than our estimates, and there might be a minor zero error in our scope settings. Both are correctable with better data. They spent 20 minutes analyzing environmental conditions along the bullet path, looking for wind indicators Williams had missed during initial observation. He pointed out subtle signs in vegetation movement and mirage patterns that suggested air currents different from their original estimates. Sarah found herself learning to read atmospheric conditions with new sophistication. For the second attempt, Williams adjusted their wind calculations based on evidence from the first shot. He also made a minor correction to the scope settings, accounting for possible zeroing discrepancies. Sarah felt more confident as they prepared for the second shot, having experienced the rifle's behavior and timing at extreme range. This time, pay attention to mirage conditions right before you shoot, Williams advised. If you see the target dancing significantly in heat waves, wait for the atmosphere to stabilize. Atmospheric distortion can throw off your point of aim by several feet. Sarah resumed her shooting position and began the careful preparation process again. She monitored wind indicators across the range, waiting for conditions to match their revised calculations. The target appeared steady through her scope, with minimal atmospheric distortion affecting her view. Her second shot felt even better than the first, with perfectly controlled breathing and smooth trigger release. Williams tracked the bullet flight and delivered his verdict with obvious excitement in his voice. Hit! Edge of the target, upper left quadrant. Sarah could barely contain her excitement. She had actually hit a target at 4,300 meters, something she would have considered impossible just 2 days earlier. Williams was grinning broadly as he recorded the successful impact, but he quickly refocused their attention on the final attempt. That was excellent, but remember we're aiming for the center of the target, Williams said. The current record requires a hit within the central scoring ring. You've proven you can reach the target. Now we need precision within precision. They analyzed the second shot's impact location and made final adjustments to their shooting solution. Williams explained that small errors in extreme-range shooting often resulted from atmospheric changes between shots. They needed to verify current conditions and adjust their calculations accordingly. The preparation for the third shot took nearly an hour. Williams wanted perfect conditions and absolute confidence in their ballistic solution before attempting the record shot. They monitored wind patterns continuously, waiting for the ideal atmospheric window. Sarah practiced her shooting position repeatedly, ensuring maximum consistency. This is your record attempt, Williams said as conditions finally stabilized. Take all the time you need. Execute when everything feels perfect. You've already proven you have the skills necessary to succeed. Sarah felt remarkably calm as she settled behind the rifle for the final time. The previous shots had built her confidence in the equipment, the calculations, and her own ability to perform under pressure. She focused on executing perfect form rather than worrying about the outcome. Through the scope, the target appeared clear and steady. Wind indicators along the bullet path showed consistent conditions matching their calculations. Sarah began her breathing sequence, settling into the meditative focus Williams had taught her. The crosshairs aligned with mathematical precision on the calculated aim point. The trigger release felt flawless, the rifle's recoil familiar and controlled. Sarah maintained her shooting position, watching through the scope as Williams tracked the bullet's flight. The 6.3-second flight time felt like minutes as they waited for the impact. "Dead center!" Williams shouted, his professional composure momentarily abandoned. "Perfect hit in the center ring!" Sarah felt a surge of triumph unlike anything she had experienced. She had achieved something extraordinary, joining an elite group of marksmen who had mastered extreme range precision. Williams was already examining the target through his spotting scope, confirming the precise impact location. The bullet had struck within inches of the target's center, well within the accuracy standards required for the facility record. Sarah's transformation from rifle cleaner to record-holding marksman was complete. "Congratulations," Williams said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "You've just accomplished something most professional snipers would consider impossible. More importantly, you've demonstrated that exceptional performance comes from dedication, preparation, and mental discipline rather than just natural talent." As they began packing up their equipment, Sarah reflected on everything she had learned during this incredible challenge. The experience had taught her far more than just shooting techniques. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed, and gained confidence that would influence every future challenge she faced. Williams documented the successful record shot with photographs and detailed measurements. Sarah's achievement would become part of the facility's training history, inspiring future students to push beyond their perceived limitations. But for Sarah, the real victory was personal growth and the knowledge that extraordinary accomplishments were possible with proper preparation and determination. The early morning sun was now fully illuminated the range as they walked back toward the facility buildings. Sarah carried herself differently than she had just hours earlier, with the quiet confidence of someone who had achieved something truly remarkable. The challenge that had seemed impossible was now a documented reality, proving that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of the most extraordinary feats. News of Sarah's remarkable achievement spread through the Special Forces training facility like wildfire. By noon, word had reached the base commander, the training director, and several visiting military officials who had come to observe routine exercises. What had begun as a private challenge between Sarah and Williams suddenly became a matter of considerable official interest. Colonel James Patterson, the facility commander, requested a meeting with Sarah that afternoon. She found herself sitting in his office, still somewhat stunned by the morning's events and uncertain about the implications of her newfound notoriety. Patterson was a career Special Forces officer with extensive combat experience, not someone easily impressed by training achievements. "Staff Sergeant Williams tells me you've set a new facility record," Patterson began, reviewing the documentation Williams had submitted. 4,300 meters, center target hit on the third attempt. "That's remarkable shooting, especially for someone without formal sniper training." Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond to what seemed like both praise and subtle questioning. Patterson continued reviewing the details of her record shot, asking technical questions about her calculations and shooting technique. Sarah answered as completely as possible, though she realized how much of her success had depended on Williams' expertise and guidance. She wanted to ensure proper credit went where it was deserved. "What's particularly interesting," Patterson said, "is that you achieved this level of accuracy in essentially 2 days of training. Most of our sniper candidates require months of instruction before attempting shots at half that distance. Either you have exceptional natural ability, or Williams has developed some revolutionary training methods." Sarah suspected the truth lay somewhere between those explanations, but she was beginning to understand that her achievement might have implications beyond personal satisfaction. Patterson's questions suggested he was evaluating possibilities she hadn't considered. "I understand you're currently working as a civilian contractor in our armory," Patterson continued. "What are your thoughts about returning to active military service? We might have some interesting opportunities for someone with your demonstrated capabilities." The suggestion caught Sarah completely off guard. She had left military service 3 years earlier with no intention of returning, satisfied with her civilian contractor position. But Patterson's hint about interesting opportunities suggested possibilities she had never imagined. What kind of opportunities? Sarah asked cautiously. Patterson smiled, recognizing her curiosity despite obvious reservations about military life. We're always looking for qualified personnel to join our advanced training programs, Patterson explained. Your background in logistics, combined with your demonstrated marksmanship skills, could be valuable in several different capacities. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Think about whether active duty appeals to you. That evening, Sarah found herself processing the day's extraordinary developments. In less than 48 hours, she had gone from anonymous facility worker to record-holding marksman to potential military recruit. The rapid progression felt surreal, like someone else's life rather than her own experience. Williams found her in the armory after hours, cleaning and organizing equipment as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. He seemed pleased but not particularly surprised by the official attention her achievement had generated. Having second thoughts about setting that record? Williams asked with a knowing smile. Sarah shook her head, though she admitted feeling overwhelmed by the sudden interest from facility leadership. Not about the shooting, Sarah clarified. That was incredible. I'm just not sure what to do with all the opportunities people are suddenly offering. This morning I was happy just maintaining rifles. Now everyone wants to discuss my future career plans. Williams understood her confusion. He had seen similar situations before, where exceptional performance in one area opened doors people hadn't expected or necessarily wanted. The military was always eager to identify and develop unusual talent, sometimes creating pressure for individuals who were content with their current situations. You don't have to decide anything immediately, Williams said. But I will tell you that what you accomplished today goes far beyond just hitting a target. You demonstrated learning ability, mental toughness, and performance under pressure that most people simply don't possess. Those qualities are rare and valuable. Over the following week, Sarah found herself at the center of considerable attention throughout the training facility. Visiting instructors wanted to hear about her shooting techniques. Fellow contractors asked how she had managed such an impressive achievement. Even some of the Special Forces candidates seemed curious about the civilian who had outperformed many trained professionals. The attention was flattering but also somewhat uncomfortable. Sarah had always preferred working behind the scenes, maintaining equipment, and supporting others' missions rather than being in the spotlight herself. Suddenly, finding herself the subject of widespread interest required personal adjustments she hadn't anticipated. Williams continued working with her on advanced shooting techniques, partly to satisfy official requests for more documentation about her capabilities, but also because Sarah had discovered a genuine passion for precision marksmanship. She found the mathematical complexity and technical precision fascinating, unlike anything she had experienced in previous military assignments. During one of their practice sessions, Williams shared information that put Sarah's achievement in broader perspective. That shot you made last week, he said, was documented and submitted to military records. You're now officially listed among the top 10 longest confirmed shots in Special Forces training history. Only 9 other people have achieved comparable accuracy at extreme range. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and disbelief at this information. Joining such an exclusive group seemed impossible for someone who had been cleaning rifles just days earlier. But the official documentation was undeniable evidence of what she had accomplished. More importantly, Williams continued, your rapid learning progression has caught attention at levels above this facility. There are programs within Special Operations Command that specialize in developing unusual talent. If you're interested in pursuing advanced training, opportunities exist that most people never hear about. The hint about higher-level programs intrigued Sarah, though she remained cautious about committing to military service without understanding exactly what would be required. Williams explained that initial discussions would involve no obligations, just conversations about possibilities and mutual interest. 2 weeks after her record shot, Sarah received a visit from Major Rebecca Chin, a Special Operations Command recruiter specializing in advanced skill development programs. Chin was herself a decorated sniper with extensive combat experience, someone who understood the technical and psychological demands of extreme-range marksmanship. "Your facility record is impressive," Chen began. "But what really interests us is the learning curve you demonstrated. Acquiring advanced skills that rapidly suggests potential for specialized training that goes well beyond conventional sniper programs." Chen described opportunities within special operations units that required personnel capable of rapid skill acquisition and performance under extreme pressure. The specific details were classified, but she could discuss general requirements and training expectations for qualified candidates. "What we're looking for," Chen explained, "are people who can master complex technical skills quickly, maintain accuracy under stress, and adapt to unusual operational requirements. Your performance here suggests you might have those capabilities." Sarah found herself genuinely interested in what Chen was describing, though she requested time to consider such a significant career change. Chen understood her need for deliberation and provided contact information for follow-up discussions. That evening, Sarah called her father back in Montana to discuss the opportunities she was being offered. He listened carefully as she described the events of recent weeks, from the initial challenge through the official recognition and recruitment discussions. "Sounds like you've discovered something you're exceptionally good at," her father said after hearing the complete story. "The question is whether you want to build a career around that talent. Military life isn't for everyone, but you seem to handle it well during your first enlistment." Sarah realized her father was right about her need to decide what kind of life she wanted to build. The shooting achievement had been personally satisfying, but it also represented a crossroads between continuing her current path and pursuing possibilities she had never imagined. Over the following month, Sarah met with several other military representatives and visited advanced training facilities to better understand what specialized service would involve. She discovered programs that combine technical expertise with operational deployment, opportunities to use her skills in real-world situations where precision mattered enormously. The decision ultimately came down to personal fulfillment versus security. Her contractor position offered stability and predictable challenges, but the military opportunities promised growth and experiences she couldn't find anywhere else. Williams encouraged her to choose based on long-term satisfaction rather than short-term comfort. "You've already proven you can accomplish extraordinary things when properly challenged," Williams told her during one of their final practice sessions. "The question is whether you want to discover what else you might be capable of achieving." Sarah made her decision on a cold morning similar to the days she had attempted her record shot. Standing again at the long-range firing line, looking toward the distant target that had started everything, she realized that some opportunities only come once. The safe choice was to maintain her current life, but the extraordinary choice was to see where her newfound abilities might lead. She submitted her application for return to active duty and acceptance into specialized training programs. Within weeks, she received orders to report to an advanced facility where her journey from rifle cleaner to elite operative would continue. The challenge of 4,300 meters had been just the beginning of a transformation she could never have anticipated. 6 months later, Sarah found herself deployed overseas, using skills that had begun with cleaning rifles and evolved through precision shooting into capabilities she couldn't have imagined. The young woman who had once been content maintaining other people's weapons now carried her own, applying lessons learned from an impossible shot to missions that required the same mathematical precision and mental toughness. Williams continued training new candidates at the original facility, occasionally sharing Sarah's story as an example of what could be achieved when talent met opportunity and determination. Her facility record still stood, inspiring others to attempt seemingly impossible challenges. But for Sarah, the real achievement wasn't the record itself, but the discovery that extraordinary accomplishments were possible when she was willing to push beyond her perceived limitations. The shot that changed her life had taught her that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of the most remarkable feats, given the right challenge and proper support. The rifle cleaner had become something she never expected, proving that potential often lies dormant until the right moment reveals what was always possible.